Welcome back to Inspired Inc., the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Blocksdorf, and today on the show, we have Brandon Pillis on here, talking about finding new perspectives on your art and finding it through life, accepting your style, and how comics can truly change your life and redirect you. All of that and so much more on today's Inspired Inc. So I was just reading Cannonball again this morning. I actually have it hung up right over here. Super great stuff. Where did some of this come from? It felt like it was very heartfelt for one. It felt like some personal experiences. But I don't know you too much personally. So how much of your like real life really blended into this? Because it feels like a whole lot.
Pretty close. I don't know if you know, I started off doing like one-page comics and I put them on a website called at cannonballcomic.com. And they were just one-page things that I came up with in my head that were actually, it started off as slice of life. And then I started branching out a little bit further, and it became just like those, you know how your mind will take off in like this weird kind of story in your head. And that's where a lot of this stuff came from. So like, after I started doing one-page comics, I started doing 3- and 4-page comics, and that's what my Cannonball is. It's like a couple of the 5-page shorts put together. And like some of those incidents, like one of the stories is about my wife walking our dog, who a lot of people in the neighborhood consider the mayor of Longfellow, which is our neighborhood. And he has to stop for everybody. And people literally get out of their cars to go and pet him across the street. And they come from everywhere just to pet him. And he'll just lay down and soak it all up. And he just attracts this love. And it's like, we started calling it like Bodhi melts people with love. And I turned that into a literal translation in the comic where it just became, he melts people with love. He just loves them so much. And they just adore him so much that they melt. And, you know, it's that kind of idea. I have another one about my daughter getting her hair brushed when she was younger. When she's 7, 8. That is an actual thing that happens. My daughter was like 6. I mean, she still doesn't like brushing her hair. And it was a literal battle between my wife and my daughter with her getting her hair brushed in the morning. And it was a chase back and forth. And I'd just be sitting there making breakfast. And I just hear
the hair monster coming out and everything. Like,
yeah, it's just like, yeah. I just hear, like, I'd be making breakfast and I just hear like, it almost sounds like a monster coming out. So a lot of this stuff just branches from, you know, real life situations in my family. And that's how I came up with this slice of life horror mishmash. And I kind of enjoy being in that, I don't know, what do you call it? A micro niche subgenre, you know? It's enjoyable. I like those kinds of things.
It reminds me a lot of like Jade Lauder, like the way he does it to horror show, and it's like comedic horror. And you know, I grew up on stuff like Creep Show, and I just saw like Trick or Treat for the first time the other night, and it's just like a comedy horror thing. And I love that, like how you poke fun at the genre, but there's so much love and humor in it, where you're not like terrified, but it has those like elements where it could really be like something creepy crawling kind of going on in your books.
Yeah. I find a lot of inspiration. Like if you look at the first short in my comic, there's almost every panel is taken from some form of horror movie or sci-fi movie, from Aliens 3 to Terminator to Guardians of the Galaxy. And whether knowingly or unknowingly, it was put in there. And it's because like Aliens is one of my favorite, Alien is my favorite sci-fi movie ever.
Great.
And Aliens is awesome too, although I'm more of an Alien person. And like you'll find like in that first 5-page comic, I have, you know, so many panels that they're inspired by Terminator, Alien, Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm trying to think, there's like 10 others in there, and I can't even think of name them all right now. But that like it's very obvious. Like one's from Alien 3. one image is from Alien 3, and I find a lot of inspiration in those great films created by those like Ridley Scott and James Cameron. These are amazing movies that build so much tension, and I just inserted them in my funny little short, here. And and the subgenre of horror comedy. Like, I was a big fan of Evil Dead movies growing up.
Oh yeah,
Sam Raimi with the Army of Darkness. It was just and the old Night of the Living Dead movies were just when they started getting into Return of the Living Dead movies, where they started getting into the comedy of the zombie genre, were so much fun as a kid.
Punk rock zombies, amazing. Like,
I love that stuff.
So that makes a lot of sense now, looking at your work, looking at your paneling, but not just so much your paneling, but your perspective. And right when, like, you started saying Evil Dead, and you look at some of the shots that these directors use to really like make them look larger than life or expansive or stretch out a little bit. That's what attracts me so much about your work, is that you're doing stuff with perspective that, like, not a lot of indie creators are doing or using. It's almost like, and I mean, I might just be tooting your horn a little bit, but it reminds me a lot of like how Jack Kirby really does use perspective with his figures and everything. And I don't think a lot of people do that, and makes it feel like it's popping out of the page and larger than life. And now kind of mixing it with that horror perspective, it kind of does have that frightfulness where they're kind of warped and different, but it's so well put together. And just like Jack's work, like when characters are reaching out and like going into attack and they have great moments like that, your work literally does that itself. Is that how you kind of pull from like those movies to kind of get that weird like camera angle to kind of really put that into play?
That is part of it. I mean, that's definitely part of it. That's definitely inspired a lot of it. But I'll be honest, it started way back in college, specializing in photography. Cool. I was an art major and I specialized in photography. We didn't have a film program. And I loved to draw at the time, but I didn't think I was good enough to do comics. And I wanted to get into film and photography. And I did. And I fell in love with social documentation of photography. And I had a professor, Vera Viditsword, who was sort of like my mentor for photography. And she was very insistent on certain rules. And one of the things was, don't put people in the center. Do not give me straight up medium shots. I want you to move around. I want you you have to learn to not be timid with the camera. She always insisted on fill the frames. So if you look at a lot of my panels, they're like everything's in the frame. So fill the frames, don't be timid. Get on your knees, get on a ladder. And I started climbing on roofs to get pictures. I started laying on the ground on my back to get photographs. And I ended up developing a style of photography from just being on the ground or being up on a roof. And I mean, I don't know if you know this, I'm a full-time carpenter, and I see the world from up high or down low a lot of times. And I enjoy those perspectives. That's where it started, was with photography and social documentation. And also my love of film is there, and also my love of comics since the early to mid 80s. So you combine all of those and you just ultimately end up with that distorted perspective, the extreme exaggerated views. So yeah, that's where I found it.
Dude, that's awesome. And that kind of, I love how you have, we were just talking to another creator recently, and pulling all those influences, you kind of feel like, oh, I'm stealing from this person. I'm stealing from this person. Everyone's going to kind of bust me and catch me on that. And that never happens. It's all these influences and like channeled through you. And then you're like, how did this guy come up with this brilliant original thing? And I love that.
You're standing on the shoulders of giants. Everybody's putting a rung on the ladder. Hopefully I'm putting my rung on the ladder for the next person behind me to come along and start climbing up. We're climbing these ladders, and all these rungs were put on by different artists and creators. One of my favorite films is The Thing from 1980, John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yes. I just rewatched it the other night. Yeah.
I know, right? I love that movie. And like, did you ever watch the original from the 1950s, The Thing from Another World, or A Thing from Another World?
I haven't seen the original. I've read the book it was based off of, but I haven't read the
Yeah.
original.
Okay, so yeah, so the original film was based on a book, but the original film, so John Carpenter built on the original film. The original film
Nice.
built on the book. That book was probably, I don't know, but I would say might have taken some, because at that period they were finding a lot of inspiration from H.G. Wells, you know, from so
Yes.
like you're building from one to the next to the next. And like if you look at the 1950s version, there's the literal sound effects from Aliens. You remember Aliens when the aliens are coming in the roof and you hear that boom,
Yeah.
boom, the beeping. That's in the 1950s version of The Thing from Another World, the same exact sound as the creature's approaching. You hear boom, boom, and I'm just like, oh my god, my mind is blown. So like we're all building off of
blew my
other
mind.
artists.
Like I didn't know that. That's
Did you
so
ever?
cool.
Did you ever read? I'm reading right now. To Sleep in a Sea of Stars.
No, but I know I've heard of this. I know what you're talking about.
You read the book. It's about an alien invasion. It's like The Expanse, but with an alien invasion, right? So humanity's spread out throughout the solar system, and and the aliens start attacking humans. And in the beginning of that book, there are so many references to, once again, alien and aliens, like names and places, and it's just like you're like, oh my god, you're like, I'm starting to understand now. I understand this author is inspired by Alien also, and Alien has a lot of inspiration from The Thing from Another World, which has it all builds off of each other. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants.
And I love you say that because I think so many people get intimidated when they're making a story or drawing and being like, man, I think it's, you know, it's too much of this or it's too much of that. And it's like, don't even worry about that. Just keep on making your thing. Just keep on rolling along. And no matter what, whatever filter you put onto it, that's yours. That's going to shine through more than any of your influences are going to shine through. And I can see how some of the photography work now makes sense. Some of the horror work and film stuff has make sense in your work. What about like artistically? Where did your style come from? Because it's very loose. And your black and whites and your inks are very like intricate. Down to like maybe even down to the items you're using to draw with. Like where does all this come from the comic book world?
I'm just very I had to learn how to be loose. So a lot of the comics that you read in Cannonball were mostly me learning to be loose. So I used to be very tense holding a pencil.
Yeah.
Pushing down really hard. In order to alleviate that, and you end up with all these pressure lines. So even if you erase, you might still see shadows of this stuff.
Yep.
So I had to teach myself how to be looser with my drawings. And part of that was buying a mechanical pencil that would snap. So I didn't use mechanical pencils at the time. So I bought a mechanical pencil and that would snap if you went too hard. And then I ended up starting to learn how to be loose and free, and it made racing easier. I don't know. I just, I've always been more drawn to looser drawings. As an art major in college, the classes, you do like gestural drawings where you would watch people walk by and you would just capture that action as fast as you can. And it had to be loose, and it could just be a bunch of squiggly lines. And that was always my favorite part of drawing, was just doing just trying to capture something almost like photography, but I'm trying to do it with my hand, you know?
That's cool. That's super interesting. I that totally makes sense because I feel like, I do a lot of small, like little drawings on my downtime, and I try to participate in Inktober so I could like figure out and learn how to draw. And an issue I always feel is just like, how do I make this not look so stiff? And I think stiffness is the one thing that every single artist kind of struggles with when they're first starting out, because you're looking at a flat sheet of paper, you're doing a 2D drawing, and you're like, how do I get this to not only like feel fluid, but like animated at the same time and it not feel so just there with that heavy pencil. So I think just what you're saying, loosening up a bit, like what other advice do you have for an artist that's just trying to like break that mold of like their stiff images?
I try to build from front to back, not just left to right, but front to back. So I think about what's going to happen in the front of the image first. Like I know what has to happen in the panel. I know what has to happen in the page. I know where it starts and where it ends. But I always think about what's happening in the front first. So if I'm drawing an image where like everybody says my hand, like I always draw this hand reaching out. I also do feet, I do eyes. I think about how that's hitting the person. I think about the fingertips first, and then the hand, and then I'll think about the forearm. Everything back here gets filled in after because you're not paying attention to all this stuff that's filled in after. So I start with what's most important on that image, which might be the hand or the facial expression. And those two things are the most important things. And I start from the front and I work my way back. And that creates a depth in the panel that maybe gives more fluidity and looseness and makes the world feel more real also.
And I guess that anatomy kind of lines up a bit better as well, because I when I've done like little drawings and I've done the reverse of what you're saying by starting with like a body part or like just a regular leg or arm, but then like I'm trying to stack like the hand on top of it, or I'm trying to stack the thigh on top of like the body and torso. You know what I mean? To kind of get that image where it's covering, but starting from
you're not probably going to see most of it.
Yeah, exactly. So you're just like you're trying to like fit that in on top of it when you're just like, this is just harder than it needs to be. I'm gonna draw like after I do recordings, I'm just gonna like try that out and see how much easier it is for me at this point. That was second thing you blow my mind with today in these 15 minutes. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you look at like a hand, right? Like I'll sometimes start with drawing this shape of the knuckles. I won't put the fingers. I'll just draw this shape and the two parts of the palm. And that's all I draw, and a little part sticking out with the thumb. And then I add the thumb, and then I start adding the fingers. And from there, I might do the forearm. And you're not going to see most of this upper part of the arm.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just like, and that hand being that far close to the image, all of a sudden is taking up about 50% of your panel space. So you've now just used one body part to fill 50% of your panel space. You only have another 50% to fill.
You're halfway
it makes
there.
You work a lot. Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
I'm cheating. I'm sorry.
No, these are the cheats we need to like make comics faster too. And so you were a photography major going into an art major, or was that
was
just
an art major? That was part of it. It was specialized. So you choose a specialization: photography, painting, sculpture. It was it was a fine arts program. So I chose photography. I fell in love with it. I was big into film, big into independent film, and that was another thing the photography professor Vera Vidisword taught me was that I was good at deconstructing, and she would give me films to deconstruct for the class. Ooh. And I would get these, and that would be my assignment, was to like, instead of papers, I would get like Hitchcock's Vertigo. I chose Hitchcock's Notorious. She chose Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up, which is Brian De Palma did a version with John Travolta in the 80s, but I did the Italian version. So like those would be some of my assignments, and it was quite fun. I mean, I enjoyed it because I kind of knew what I was doing when I deconstruct stuff, and that allowed me to figure out story structure and how to tell a story by learning how to break it down, and why when you're deconstructing something, you're looking at it and you're going, why? Why did the artist do this? Why did the director do this? Why did the screenwriter do this? Why did the penciler do this? Why did the letterer do this? If you keep asking those questions why, you start finding answers, and you start finding these great solutions for yourself for how to tell a story, and that's so not only learning photography visually, I was learning about story and story structure in photography.
That's so cool. It's so great how you're using like a different medium to like elevate like the medium you really want to do. Like it's almost like you're just like, okay, this is like masterful. How can I apply it to this? Like how much time do you think you would dedicate to deconstructing just a single film, for example? And like just to show
nowadays I can, let's see, by the time I was leaving college, I could just watch a film and I would just see stuff. I see stuff all the time. Just because now I'm so engaged in it, and it's just like, oh, that's why. Oh, that's right. So, like, one of the biggest things, if you're looking at a film, and I try to understand this for comics too, the first image you see is going to tell you so much about a movie or a comic, or the first paragraph is going to tell you so much about a book, because that's what the artist, author, director wants you to know. Great example is Alfred Hitchcock. I've studied a lot of his films, and he always splits the screen. Every first image is somehow splitting the screen, because all of his movies were about duality of man, and whatever that meant for that film. Who's another, like, if you've ever seen The Usual Suspects, one of the first images in Usual Suspects is a crate with a rope hanging and all these knots and twisted rope that's all jumbled up hanging from these crates as the camera moves around it. What they're telling you is this is a twisted story, and you don't know which, if you've ever seen Usual Suspects, this is cool. A twisted story that you don't know which line to follow. That first image is telling you that right away. So if you look at movies and you look at those first images, you're going to get so much about the movie that you're about to watch.
Oh, dude, that's so cool that you're bringing that up, because I started trying to figure that out with films and comics. And I realized this actually, probably something maybe our audience is real familiar with, but like Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, page 1 on that book. In fact, maybe I could pull it real fast. Page 1 tells you everything you need to know about that entire story, because I don't know if you recall it, but he's in that race car.
I don't remember.
Okay, yeah, check this out. Like panel, it's like a 9-panel kind of grid over here. And he's in this race car. And what's so cool about it, I think there's one of the lines where he's I've got the home stretch all to myself. When the reading stopped making sense, I switched to manual. And it's like one of those things where it's like, I've got the home stretch to myself when the reading stopped making sense. And that's because like Gotham doesn't make sense to him anymore. He's aged, things have changed. It's a different world to him. But the computer crosses its own circuits. It refuses to let go. I coax it. So, the city itself refuses to let go. And he has to go in and change things, like him coaxing it.
That was an awesome deconstruction. Wow.
Dude. Panel 4, it shoves hot needles in my face and tries to make me blind. I'm in charge now, and I like it. I mean, that's the whole thing when he's encountering and realizing he needs to turn back into Batman, and he now has everything. I'm in charge now, and I like it. That's him guiding the mutants and all that type of stuff. And just this whole entire thing, how it's him not recognizing Gotham anymore, him realizing that like he's older and it's all different, and he needs to like get back and take charge. And it literally, that first page, go back and read it, and then read the whole series. Awesome. And you're like, fuck yeah, it's a fun. Maybe we'll do a little special where we can deconstruct that a bit. I would love that, because it's one of my favorite.
Oh God, yeah. I love deconstructing. I know, and you can learn so much, and that's how you can study great artists and great creators, is just looking at their work and figuring out why they did something. Just always ask a question, why? And, yeah, I mean, your deconstruction right there is just amazing.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's one of those things I think every creator needs to do to their favorite stuff. I mean, you're only going to be able to steal their awesome secrets and their quality and their storytelling by being like, what did they do, and how can I apply that to what I'm doing? Mimicking others is just the best way to kind of learn as much as possible, which kind of brings me back to photography. Like, would you also like trace images, take photos and trace things? How would you utilize photography into your art?
Okay. Social documentation is about capturing randomness in life. Two of my favorite photographers are Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand. If you ever seen that image of Marilyn Monroe standing over the grate and the air is blowing up and she's holding her dress down, that wasn't planned. She was standing over a subway grate and she was walking into like a premiere or something. And Gary Winogrand was outside and he was photographing the people walking in, and he just captured that image because his shooting style, he never looked through his lens. He was always just snap, 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 snap. He would go through rolls. He's died like 20, 25 years ago, and they're still processing his film. They consider him the first digital photographer. So when you're capturing those images, you're capturing people in the middle of talking. You know, they're doing things like hand gestures. They're walking. They're fluid. They're moving. Everything. That's what life is like. Like life isn't posed. People are, you know, when they talk and they make a point, they close their eyes and they say something like this. You'll see some of my images have people like this, like a lot of hand gestures. I mean, we talk with our bodies too. And Gary Winogrand captured a lot of those images in New York City, and he did it for decades. And if you see some of his beautiful imagery, it's just like people don't know he's photographing them, and because he's just like this. He's got his hand and he's just going like, he's not even looking at him, and he's just click, 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 click. And he would do it with one hand. At that time, you had to literally do click, wind it, click, wind it. And he learned how to do it with one hand. Most people do it with two hands. And that's all he did. He was just like, boom. And it's just amazing to see life in that way, to see these sudden stopped framed moments of two people having a conversation, three women sitting at a table talking, you know, a crossing guard waving children by. It's just, that is most of life. And that's what I don't know how to explain it. That's just, it makes it more real and that's how I learned how to draw like that, was just looking at those images and actually capturing those images for myself. You know,
that's awesome. I mean, because I've seen how photography has influenced, you know, Alex Ross, Frank Franzetta, like, you know, all sorts of great, like, you know, artists and like painters and whatnot. So seeing it like really put into play in different various ways, not just like I'm going to use it as a photo reference, but just like,
I don't
trace over it if I'm going to use it for like, just to capture, to understand how clothing works, just to study. Just because you're using a photo doesn't mean you're just using it to trace, basically. And I feel like a lot of people run away from it, like artistically, because they're like, oh, it's a photo. I either can't replicate it because it's too good, or I don't want to trace it, you know? But it's like, no, there's different ways to utilize a photo.
Yeah, I will use photo references all the time. I've never like drawn on top of one, but I do use photo references for, sometimes I need to know how somebody is, if I have somebody saying something angry or not angrily, like if they're being, I need to know a different way other than the three poses I have. And all of a sudden I'll be searching through, and I will look at Gary Winogrand, or I will look at Robert Frank, or Walker Evans, or Dorothea Lange, and I will see how people sit and or move or talk, you know, and I will see these images, and I will understand how their hips are shifting as they're leaning one way. You know, like you're trying to figure out how to get another weapon in my arsenal of how to present somebody being this emotion.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, because I feel like, you know, I'm going back to kind of Frank Miller. I remember when he was doing some of the layouts and panelings for characters for Dark Knight, there's one image that always stood out to me when I saw like the behind the scenes work. And it was literally just faces, and it was just some guy's face, like, or the guy actually took photos or whatever, and Miller found this like guy making a dozen different faces, and he went and recreated them. And so like just being able to study the like lines that come out of every facial expression, that's probably going to elevate your work 10 times more than just worrying about, like, I don't know, probably the most basic things an artist will, you know, lines and, you know, body anatomy and stuff like that. I feel like if you're really looking at how someone moves and shifts, that's more important than like how great the overall product does. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean by that?
No, it makes absolutely. But think about it this way. You have all these tools in the face to create an emotion. You also have all these tools in the body to create an emotion. So you have not just the lips, you have the eyes, you have the corners of the eyes, you have the eyebrows, you have the noses, the flaring of the nostrils, you have cheek structure, wrinkles if they're rolled, you know, the how you perspective, you can use that to show an emotion. But you also have, you know, somebody's like angry, you have the shoulders, you have the arms, you have the hands, you have, it's like a combination. It's like making a song, you know, or an orchestra. You have like all these things to play with to create one emotion in the panel. And you can utilize all of them and to make that emotion come through that much more.
That's awesome. And so, putting all this together, how did you really shift from like photography to be like, you know what, comics are where it's at, and that's what I want to follow? Where did your passion for comics really just take over your life?
Um, okay, I got into photography and film because I didn't think I was good enough to draw comics. That was a
Wow.
way back when.
Hmm.
I've wanted to do comics since I was like 9, 10 years old, like a lot of us who are in the
Yeah.
indie comics. I didn't think I was good enough. I got into photography to also play around with film, and I fell in love with photography. Um, when I graduated college, I did do some short films. Got one into a festival. It was just a fun little 5-minute thing. Did a few others. I've worked on a bunch, and then from there, I moved on to screenwriting. Fell out of comics for a little while, and I guess it was more like screenwriting wasn't for me. My screenplays were not good. I did like 6 or 7. They were not good. And then I guess it was somewhere around 2010, 2009, when the economy collapsed. I was working construction. So um, all this stuff was happening at the time. And I remember just like everything was really dark, and I was in construction, and construction got hit really hard because there was nobody getting mortgages or anything like that from banks. And I remember just thinking to myself, I just want to do something I want for myself, something I loved. And I started drawing. I just started drawing again, and I started buying comics again. And then I started to learn how to ink, and it just moved from there. So it's been a long time coming, like 14 years that I've been drawing, but it's only been the last 3, 4 years that I've been putting stuff out and showing something. So it was a really dark time in 2010 to be like, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm not worrying about doing what I'm supposed, like, I'm not going to worry about like career, because it was like construction was really dead at the time. And it was just like trying to find something. And like I said, it felt really dark, and I just wanted to have some kind of control. And I just started enjoying myself. It brought a lot of joy back to me, was
Hmm.
drawing. So where I was losing a lot of joy, I started bringing it back with drawing and making comics again. And I took the things I learned from screenwriting and filmmaking and just shifted into drawing. And I would say, I'm going to do the thing that I wanted to do when I was a kid.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
just, 14 years later, here I am.
And so, one of those things that you kind of had to get over was just like, just accepting your style and your skill level.
Oh yeah.
What's that like? What is, accepting what your drawings are coming out as? And what was it like finally putting them out into the world at the same time? I know it took a while, but like, what was that
Yeah.
process like in your head for you?
You have to be forgiving of yourself, first of all.
Hmm.
Once I started forgiving myself for certain things, like, it's okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I started just posting them on my social medias. Um, it was, how do I say? I don't know. It was just, I would just, phew, it was hard.
Yeah, it's a hard thing.
Opening
I
yourself
totally
to the
agree.
world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've tried drawing and I knew I wasn't good at it, and I decided to turn it into a live YouTube show to be like, if I'm gonna draw, I'm gonna have all you guys see, and if it sucks, like, well, that's what came out today, you know? And I
No,
think that's exactly what you gotta do is just, go to that point of like, I need to put it out there, and whatever comes out is me and my style. And I can work on it and work on
exactly.
it. And just once you kind of get past that, like every hand's different, we all have different brains. We're all going to draw a little bit different. We're not going
Yes,
to be the cookie cutter Tony Daniel, Jim Lee, like Jason Fabuk type of style. That's a league way out of what we're talking about. And as much as I respect those guys, I do love the flawed, punk rock essence of just like my own style. I'm going to do it the way I want, and this is how it came out, and this is what I have to give you. And once you kind of accept that, it becomes way easier to just be like, I drew this. Here you go, world. Take it or leave it. But that's what I just did.
You know, it's funny you say that. Some of the first comics where I started realizing that I can that there are varying styles when I started getting back into comics. One of them was Scott Pilgrim.
Oh,
Seeing
cool.
that style was being like, oh, it doesn't, like you said, doesn't have to be Jim Lee, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because Scott Pilgrim was not Jim Lee, style. What was the other one? Hernandez Brothers.
Oh yeah, yeah. Love and Rockets and all that.
Yeah, Love and Rockets. So it's like seeing those styles. It was like, oh, there's a lot of different styles. I almost forgot about that. Like in the 80s, everything was very same,
Mm-hmm.
except for like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah,
They were the only, like,
yeah.
those black and whites and early colors. They were like, they all had the same red bandana around their head at the time. That was a different style, compared to all the house styles. So like coming back to comics and then understanding that, like, oh, people really like these different styles like Scott Pilgrim, and it doesn't have to be a complicated dynamic Jim Lee style. That gave me a little bit of encouragement too, understanding that, oh, maybe I can do something like this,
But that's awesome because I think everybody kind of needs to hear that too, in a sense that, like, the mainstream, Marvel, DC style, as great and skilled as that is, like, have
Mhm.
fun with your own, like, explore
Yeah.
your own. We've talked recently in like personal chats about like Lone Wolf and Cub. And
Oh yeah.
I was so attracted by that series because I believe the dude just used it with like a brush. Like, I don't
Yep.
think he used, and yeah, he just used that. And not only does that take a lot of skill, but like that takes a lot of like getting over fear. And if
Well,
you just try to draw something with just like that, to let it go and allowing yourself to let go enough to be like, whatever comes out with this ink, that's what's going to happen with this ink.
it was amazing. Yeah, it's just, if you look at the pages, um, not every page is like, museum worthy work of art, but they
Hmm.
make sense for the story. And then sometimes
Yeah.
you get these sprawling landscapes that are just a few simple brushstrokes, and you're like, my God,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
simple. And you're just like, he used the brush. Like, once again, we were talking about like the tools you can use and how you can use multiple aspects of like a tool. Like I was saying, like how you can use all the facial structures and body to do an emotion. Think about a brush. You can use pressure, speed,
Hmm.
movement of the arm, all to create like this varying line styles. And once you learn all these different line styles, you can few simple strokes of a brush and you have a sprawling landscape of Japanese countryside as a samurai emerges from the mist. You're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
how does he
How?
do
And
it?
you're just like, how? Yeah. I love that. Like, and
It's
speaking of
so
tools,
great.
the inking on your book really captivates me. Like, I'm very attracted to like how, like, the way your pen comes out and how heavy it is and how thin your line gets sometimes, and then how you can vary in thickness. But being a black and white book, there's a thing about black and white books where you have to have a balance between clarity and having enough ink on the page to tell the story properly. But also not thin enough ink so where it just looks like almost bare. You do a very good
Yeah.
balance between the two. What's your mindset when you're inking? And like also what kind of tools do you use just for other creators to like look into?
Oh, well, now I'm just doing now I'm currently doing digital inking. But when I
Nice.
was inking, when I, and I do still sometimes play around, I did use a whole collection of micron pens, varying
Nice.
widths. And then I would use a inking brush. I don't, I'm not in my studio right now. I'm
Mhm.
in my wife's office. I don't have anything on me, but there is this a Japanese brush that you can just fill the back with ink, and and you just squeeze a little bit and it comes out, and it's just got this. It's like a calligraphy brush pen,
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
and that gives you. I'm really kind of stiff with my inking on paper. It's kind of you to say. I appreciate everything you said about my inking on that book, and I'm very. I feel like I'm too stiff with the brush. I think I could be even looser with the brush. Like you said, the Lone Wolf and Cub. It's like amazing brush work. But that's probably why I like the micron pens too. I use a lot of
Mhm.
those to give me varying thicknesses depending on the image, you know, and texture that I want to create.
I think that's really good too, because I've experimented with the small stuff I've done is like, I'll try either doing a variety of microns because some of them start off real thin and then you're like, no, I need to thicken this up and make that line better. But I've also done the approach where I'm like, I'm going to use this one brush for this whole drawing and just like make it work. You know what I mean? Where you're just like, I want to just use this one tool and just get it down. Yeah.
Just a tip.
You're just doing like breathing exercises as you're drawing to keep so still and focused. And like, and when you mess up, you're just like, well, now I got to work with that. I can't even, I got to.
You know who's great? You know who's great to watch? Sometimes he'll do videos is, do you know Jesse Lonergan?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, you should follow him. He does amazing paneling, and he does this amazing, like once in a while he'll do not live drawings, but reels on Instagram, and he'll show how he does like a certain thing with the brush. And he did this thing with the brush where it was just like, he's pulling it down and he's just like, pressure, release, pressure, release, pressure, release. And you end up with this thick, thin line. And it was just like this amazing motion line that added so much depth to a panel. Sometimes following great creators like that and seeing how when they do those reels is interesting to learn how their techniques, their brush techniques.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's another thing that there's so many ways to attack the inking aspect of things. It's challenging, and I love like hearing about coloring, and we'll probably talk about coloring in another episode. I know we both know David Lujan, and he gave me the cool tip of like, you know, start off with 3 colors and just utilize those 3 colors and slowly grow so you're not overwhelmed, because that's the thing too when it comes to, I even feel like to inking at some aspects, you know, it's a bit simplified with inking, but like with coloring, you just have such a palette and you're like, how do I even, not knowing anything about it or just entry level or just, you know, still intermediate, you're kind of like, how do I just choose what's going to be there? I mean, that's why people like Dave Stewart just blow my mind, because like when I look at his work with Darwin Cook versus like Sean Murphy and the palettes he uses for everybody, I'm like, how do you know colors so well? How do you briefly approach your coloring, especially with your new book?
Actually that I did the same exact thing David said, was I picked 3 colors. I picked 3 colors. I went through palettes. I knew there was a gold I wanted to use. I'm fortunate. My wife used to be an art director for about 15, 18 years or whatever. And she's got all these books of palettes and that give you these great combinations with the hex codes that you can input in Photoshop. So I can get them directly from the book, put them in, and they're on my Photoshop now. So, I mean, I did the same thing David did. I picked 3 colors. But I went a little bit further, and those 3 colors, I would make more colors mixing those 3 colors. Cool. Right now, my new book's got a palette. And from that palette, I have the 3 colors, plus I have skin tones, because I want to make sure that's something I don't see in books a lot, is varying skin tones. So I have skin tones, and then I have my 3 colors, and skin tones are done with that. And then all shadows and all the other colors are done with these 3 colors that I mix and match in various ways to get like a purple, to get but they all go on. I'd end up with a blue, a purple, like an orange. And from there, I ended up with this like Sunday Comix palette that is kind of funny on my next book.
Yeah. It's very bright, I feel. And I mean, the character's name is Mr. Bright Eyes, but Bright like the bright side, there you go. But like, dude, it's perfect for that too. You know what I mean? Like it really resonates like within the aspect of the book.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, it goes along with my style, is this Sunday Comix color palette. And I'm enjoying playing with it. We'll see how far I take it. I have to use it for the next 3 issues. So
be a fun challenge.
It's gonna be a fun challenge.
That's comics is like a giant puzzle piece from like, you know, I even think about that when I do my paneling. I did an anthology submission for the Shadow Anthology Apollo City Comics is putting out, and it's just a 2-page thing, but it's about shadow work. And so I kind of did a 9 panel page, and that was like encompassing all the different types of shadows and every panel, like the through shadow work. And then you have the full page splash, which is like the main character and all these essences of what he was working through, part of him. So it's like you have these individual parts, and then you have the full page splash that combines everything. So that's like that puzzle thing that you get to have fun with. Or with the punk anthology, I did like 9-panel grid, 6-panel grid, 3 to full page splash. And it's fun working with those like puzzle ways, you know what I mean, to really tell a story at the same time.
Well, somebody's been reading Tom King.
Oh yeah, dude, yeah, so much. 100%. This is 100% called me out.
You should actually check out Jesse Lonergan then, because you'll find some amazing paneling in his work. I hope to be inspired by him in my next book for paneling, because he does amazing 2-page spreads, but like he breaks up everything in these little squares that creates a lot of movement and motion in his pages and a lot of depth. And it's really interesting.
Like Frank Whiteley does that a lot. And I've always been, really in love with Frank Whiteley, and the way that book, We Three, the way he breaks up panels, or Flex Metallo. Those are 2 of my favorite books of his. And I don't know if you've read either one of those.
I have not read either of those. Love Everlasting. Have you read that?
I have only read the first issue. It's really good. And Isla, I forget her name.
Elsa Chartier.
Elsa. Yeah,
she does,
her YouTube channel is really good too.
Oh yeah, she did some amazing paneling work in the later issues of Love Everlasting that reminded me of that smaller structure of this. It was a breakdown of a woman who's being tormented through time, and it's just like this panel, and you see every aspect of her emotions going through these panels, just like Jesse Lonergan. And it reminded me of Jesse Lonergan, so it's probably along the same lines of Frank Whiteley.
Another good example, if someone wants to look into it too, but in Sandman Overture, the one with J.H. Williams III, did the art for it. There's this beautiful 2-page spread where Dream is talking to Father Time, and you're kind of like following through it. But then there's also stuff happening where everyone's changing because he's talking to Father Time. So he's aging and de-aging, and there's an apple through the whole way that's rotting and being grown. And it's so fluid that you're like, how is this Sandman Overture, that whole, my favorite stuff. Like
they all did that kind of stuff. Even the Constantine books, and was it Constantine or was it Hellblazer? I can't remember.
Hellblazer.
And then they would. I mean, all those books did stuff like that. Even up to Transmetropolitan would have really cool stuff like that, like in the way they paneled and worked through these beautiful images. Yeah. Oh my God.
Shade the Changing Man. I don't know if you ever read that Vertigo series.
No, I haven't.
That's an awesome Peter Milligan series. It's hard to find. They never really reprinted it after a while. But I bet if you go into your local shop, they might have some back issues. And that's another phenomenal run. Oh, for sure. Yeah, dude, check them out. I've read the first like 30 something issues of that run, and I own most of it. And it's so good. It's really influential in a lot of my work now, from what it's turned into, especially color wise, and the trippiness. And when you're talking about fluid lines,
I love those colors.
How they make that. Yeah. In fact, I have an issue right here. I was just like looking at. I wonder if stuff like this, really just insane, almost like indie early 70s work that you could imagine. Stuff that you just couldn't come across anymore. That even down to the color palette. Super. I
love their color palettes. When I chose my color palette, and like I said, that's awesome. I stumbled into the Sunday's Comics style, like palette, I call it. But when I was choosing the palette, I was actually thinking of Vertigo books. So I have the greenish gray, a bright pink, and like a gold. And I was thinking of Vertigo, and I was thinking of Hellblazer, and some of those late 80s, early 90s books in that palette. was what I was, and mostly that it's like a greenish grayish blue, and
I know exactly what you're talking about too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just I fell in love with that, and I just remember that being on Constantine's face as a shadow and being like on his clothes a lot, and yeah, I just that's Vertigo. Those old Vertigo images implanted in my head have really inspired a lot of my coloring choices. So
that's so cool.
We'll see how it works. I think I've ended up with something a little brighter than Vertigo, and I'm happy with it because I like bright. So
yeah. That's so cool. I could talk about that all day, but to kind of like wrap up the show, I know we're approaching an hour now. You know, you talked about. I just want to like ask one more good question.
Sure.
You talked about like the struggle that you were having as you were rediscovering like your passion for comics, and you used it as an outlet to kind of find happiness in your life and to kind of push through. But I know comics is also one of those things that could be very discouraging and very hard to break through. Like you're still putting out some of your first books, but what has been one of the hardest things to overcome, and what was it like to finally get your book in your hands after all that?
Okay. First, the hardest thing to overcome was the self-doubt, the thought that I wasn't good enough. Being inspired by other creators and seeing other creators out there was the first step to overcoming that. The second step was the support from the indie comics community is just outstanding. Like everybody's got a voice and everybody's got a style, like you said. And these things are when we support each other, and like Mark Bernal is one of the biggest cheerleaders out there.
Yeah,
and I find a lot of inspiration from him, just helping, yeah, he's right. Like everybody's got to let's cheer everybody on. It's a big umbrella. And that's a huge step too, knowing that everybody's got my back and I'm going to have everybody else's back out there too. What was the other question? Oh, getting my book in my hand for the first time. That was amazing. Damn near cried after like 12 years of drawing something, and then having that book in my hand for the first time. I was just like, oh my God. And I right away I only brought 5 copies to my local comic shop. They said, we're going to put it on the shelf. And they put it right between Catwoman and Captain America. And there was my book, and the copy sold. And to come back like a few days later and they're like, yeah, your book sold out. I'm like, wow. It's amazing. Like, yes.
Yeah. Dude, that's the coolest thing. I just posted a picture recently on the Instagram of like seeing my book on the rack at 4-Color Fantasies, my local shop, and it was just like I was just walking around browsing, talking to the owner about setting up, to table later that week, and just coming across it and seeing it there. You're just like, what? That's mine. That's a trip because I'm shopping right now. Like it's awesome. A bizarre thing. Yeah. It's a beautiful moment. I'm so glad that you got to experience that, and I'm so glad that comics have, like many of us, saved you. Comics have a really powerful way of changing someone's life and giving them a path and giving them a community too, and also
helps connect us.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why we utilize this show, is to just continue inspiring others to hopefully never let a comic book creator give up and just keep on going and sharing these stories. So thank you so much for being on the show today. I really hope to get you back on soon because there's just so much more we have left to talk about. But tell us,
Brandon,
where to find you and what you're up to, and just tell us real briefly about your books you have out.
Right now I have currently out is Cannonball Presents Boom. That's available at LKC, at the LKC shop, the lesser known comic shop. You can also find me at cannonballcomic.com. That's where you can see a lot of my older stuff and a preview of my book coming out. It's kickstarting right now, currently as we are speaking, and it'll be released in February. And that book is called Autolyse, and I have a 10-page preview on my website, cannonballcomic.com. You can also follow me at Instagram at @bdepillis or at Twitter at @bdepillis. And you can find me in those places where I post a lot of art and a lot of updates and work that's coming out.
Awesome. Brandon, this has been amazing. I'm so glad we finally got to talk and speak to person. And thanks for hanging.
Thank you.